Thank you guys for being here, for covering our retreat. We've covered a lot of topics. Economic policy is my sweet spot and my passion. And let me just say a few things in contrast to what we're talking about today among my colleagues, and and with the context of the last few years. I can't think of an area in President Biden's agenda that has, quite frankly, done more harm or created more pain for working families and our fellow Americans than his economic agenda. And I don't say that with glee so that we can contrast and score political points at a Republican retreat. I know he tried to tell a very different story during the State of the Union speech, but according to the polls, I don't think anybody was believing it. The reason they don't believe it is because it's not their experience. And so, as I've said before, 3 years of economic policies like paying people not to work, turns out if you do, they'll take you up on it, and you'll have a labor shortage, which is part of the supply side squeeze, which has also exacerbated inflation. The assault on American energy and the conventional fuels that turn the cranks on this great economy and that keep prices low for consumers, another part of his failed economic agenda. We cannot tax and regulate our way out of this fragile economic situation. We need relief on the supply side. We need relief for Americans who are paying now $1,100 a month more than they did before inflation. Or to say it another way, they have $1,100 less in their pockets to pay their bills because of record inflation and interest rate hikes that stem primarily from those policies I just mentioned and the unbridled trillions of dollars in spending. $6.5 trillion added to the national debt from that spending. And all of it has created the crushing force of a cost of living crisis. The president, I expected him to pivot at least, if not do an about face and change course fundamentally on his economic policies in the State of the Union and in his budget. And I've got to say, I'm just shocked at the audacity and the disconnection from his policies and the consequences of his policies on the American people and our economy and our job creators, that he would submit a budget that would double down on everything I just talked about. Literally. It's Build Back Better on steroids. It is the highest sustained levels of taxing, spending, and borrowing in the history of the United States. And you all know, because we've talked over my first year or so as budget chair, that what's driving the debt, not that we shouldn't look for all unnecessary and wasteful spending, is the mandatory spending. It's 75% of the budget. It'll be 80% of our entire budget in 10 years, according to CBO. It's 90+% of the growth in our budget. And President Biden expands or increases mandatory spending by $2.5 trillion. But he doesn't pay for all of the growth in government and spending. He tries with $5 trillion in new taxes and still doesn't do it, adding $1.6 trillion every year to the deficit on average for a total of over $16 trillion in debt. Just to contrast, that's his vision. He says, show me your budget, I'll show you your values and your priorities. Well, we just passed for the second time our balanced budget out of committee. And that's our view of America's future, a better and brighter future. It balances in 10. It reduces the deficit spending over that 10 years by $14 trillion. Pro-growth policies that grow by 1% over the 2% projected growth of CBO, which is $3 trillion in deficit reduction. President Biden's budget grows 25% faster than the economy is growing. You'll never get out of this debt hole of $34 trillion, highest level of indebtedness in the history of the world, if you don't grow your economy faster than you're spending and adding debt. We do. We do. And because he doesn't, he's going to spend more in his budget, $2.5 trillion more, and I'll end here, $2.5 trillion more to service the debt, that is net interest cost, over that 10 years, than he will invest in our sons and daughters in the armed services. It's a penance what he commits to our servicemen and women. Not that there's not waste at the Pentagon, but he showed us his priorities. We've showed the American people ours, and I think this is a tale of two different worldviews and two different paths to American prosperity.